Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So this video is going to be a little different from the videos I've done recently. And it's going to be a movie review of the film Star Wars The Last Jedi. And I know it's late. The film came out on December 15th, and I'm just now getting to it. I saw the movie on Friday with my daughter, and I just want to take some time to share my thoughts about the film, even though it's extra late. I wanted to see this movie the moment it came out, but I was traveling and I wasn't able to do so. But now that I've had a chance to watch the film, I want to take time to provide my thoughts about the film. And for those of you who have not seen this film, I just want to give you an alert. This will contain spoilers in it. So if you have not seen the movie, I encourage you to watch this review after you have had an opportunity to do so. Because again, this review will have a lot of spoilers in it. So before I actually saw this movie, my expectations were lowered after I heard from my brother and some of my friends about this film. They were talking about how it didn't live up to the hype, how it was trash and all this and that. And actually, before I received their comments, on Facebook and stuff like that, I already had some suspicions that it wouldn't be that good. Um, just based on like The Force Awakens, there were certain things in The Force Awakens which departed from the main Star Wars franchise. And that caused me to have concerns about this film. So after watching this film for myself, I have to say that my brother was correct, that some of my friends and relatives were correct about this film. It was a major disappointment. But I will say this, it's entertaining enough for someone to go watch it. I would not discourage people from watching it. If you are a Star Wars fan, you probably should go ahead and watch this film. And actually, I would encourage you to just wait till it comes on DVD at this point. It's not a movie that you absolutely must see right now. It's something that can wait. I'm going to go through like some of my complaints about this film. The first complaint that I have about this film and really about The Force Awakens as well is that these films relied too heavily upon the prior films. They borrowed a lot from the prior films and they didn't have much real originality to them. And that's a major problem with the film. It seems like what they did is said, well, let's repackage these prior films and just sell it as something new. So basically, here you have them repackaging what had occurred in Return of the Jedi, which is an excellent film. But what they had done is basically try to recreate some elements of that. And one of the elements that they tried to recreate is the part where Luke Skywalker, in the original Return of the Jedi, where he surrenders and he allows them to take him captive, and he does so with hopes that he will be able to convince Darth Vader to leave the dark side of the Force. And as you all know, in the original Return of the Jedi, he does just that. Like towards the end, he convinces Darth Vader to abandon the dark side and to join him in the fight against the Emperor. So they tried to borrow from that. And here you had basically the character who's supposed to be the last Jedi, and I can't remember her name, but she's trying to convince the villain to turn away from the dark side and all that kind of stuff, and she thinks that she has convinced him to do so. So in that sense, it borrows heavily from Return of the Jedi, and then also a lot of the imagery um, from this Last Jedi movie borrows a lot from The Empire Strikes Back. You'll recall in The Empire Strikes Back, the rebels are on some planet that's a planet that has snow and all that kind of stuff. It's like a winter planet, a planet with a lot of ice and all that kind of stuff. And the Empire comes there and they have these machines that are like giant camels or whatever. They have those same type of machines. In this installment of Star Wars, they're on the same type of planet, which is like some kind of winter planet, and they're trying to attack the rebels' headquarters in the same kind of fashion that they did so in The Empire Strikes Back. So that was one drawback from this film, that they borrowed too heavily on those prior films. Also, another drawback was this, the scenes where they had the lightsaber fights. Those were disappointing. Like, I was actually expecting there to be some kind of major conflict between the Last Jedi and this new Emperor and his follower. But in this particular movie, like the way they killed the villain and the main villain was disappointing. Because basically what happens is, and I'm sorry, I can't remember these characters' names, but the guy who's supposed to be in the same position as Darth Vader, he eventually turns against this new emperor. And he does so in a sneaky kind of way. He uses the Force. Like, this emperor is all like fixated on attacking this last Jedi and everything. And while he's talking to her and using the Force to hold her in certain positions and all that kind of stuff, his follower, his student, uses the Force to manipulate a lightsaber that's on the side of this bad guy, this new emperor, and he turns the lightsaber on, and the lightsaber suddenly just slashes him and kills him. So he doesn't have a chance to fight against the Last Jedi and against this student of his. And he just dies in an anticlimactic type of way. So it's like, you're expecting some kind of major fight, major sword fight and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't materialize. I mean, you're expecting a fight along the levels of um, when Yoda, for instance, fought against the Emperor in the Revenge of the Sith, or what's his name? What's that guy's name? Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker went against Count Dooku, when they were fighting. You expected a sword fight along those lines. That's what, you expect in a Star Wars movie. You expect like a major lightsaber battle to the death. Or like that scene in Revenge of the Sith when the Jedi confront the Emperor and they finally realize who he is. And he fights all these Jedis at once and he battles it out to the death with them. That's what you're expecting. But you didn't have that kind of fight here. You had the Emperor killed in a matter of seconds, you know. And the thing that made that so disappointing is the Emperor is supposed to have this certain type of awareness. He's aware of people's emotions, aware of people's thoughts and all that kind of stuff. So surely he should be aware of the struggle that his student is having. And there are some scenes where he talks about that, how he can sense this and that from the student and from this last Jedi and stuff like that. So it seems like it would be highly unlikely that his student would be able to surprise attack him, given the fact that he uses the Force to feel people's emotions and all that kind of stuff. So that was a major disappointment, just how the Emperor was defeated, and then how the lightsaber fight scene unfolded. Instead of fighting Jedis that have all this power and stuff like that, you just had the Last Jedi and this student villain fighting against these guards, and that was not that impressive. I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't anything like what you would expect on the level of the fight between Yoda, for instance, and Count Dooku, or Yoda and the Emperor. You know, those were major fights that brought a lot of attention to them. Another problem that I had with this film was just like the so-called minority characters. You had the African African man who used to be a stormtrooper, his role, and then you also had a couple of Asian characters in this film. And the thing that stood out with these characters is that they just seem to be incompetent. I mean, they seem to be have the right intentions. You know, they seem to have courage and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they were incompetent and they did not achieve their mission. So that was a disappointment, man. It's like you have minority characters featured in this film, but their role is not that significant. And that's disappointing. I mean, we need a movie where, African or black characters or even other minority characters play a bigger role in the story, play a significant role, play a positive role. And that's something that was lacking here. I mean, it's good to see these characters in the film, but at least make them successful. I mean, you had this one rebel leader who was, despite his antics and him going against the grain and being rebellious and all that kind of stuff, he was more effective than those other two characters, and he was more respectable and all that kind of stuff. So I just thought that that was problematic, man. I would just appreciate more positive images of the so-called minority characters. Also, they had a brief appearance of Yoda in this film, which they could have left out because the way they had Yoda, they had him all goofy, like, all goofy like he was in The Empire Strikes Back. And that's not the Yoda that you really like. Like when in The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke Skywalker first meets Yoda, Yoda is acting all goofy and silly and stuff like that. And, in such a way that you wouldn't expect that he is a Jedi, a great Jedi master and all this and that. So they kind of like tried to rehash that. And again, that's another example of them borrowing heavily from the prior films. So they had Yoda all goofy like and all that kind of stuff instead of the way that he was presented in the earlier, the way they have things is out of sequence. But they have in the more recent installments of the Star Wars franchise, they had Yoda more serious. They had him as a wise man, as somebody that imparted wisdom, someone that was a skillful warrior and all that kind of stuff. But in this movie, they revived that goofy Yoda, and that's something that I didn't expect, man. And it's like, and it was disappointing that they would do so. Now, another problem that I have with this film is how they killed Luke Skywalker. It didn't make any kind of sense. It made zero sense, and I don't know why they included it. Like, they had a scene where Luke Skywalker just disappeared, like his body just evaporated and his clothes just fell down. And there was no reason for that to happen. He wasn't sick. He didn't get killed. So why did they even include that scene? It's like, why would they get rid of his character? And then just the way they had Luke Skywalker, how he was reluctant to teach the student. And that brings me to another point. Like, she goes all the way to this island, to this planet to try to get training from this guy. And he's all reluctant to train her. And I mean, you understand why after, they unfold the plot. And I'll get into that in a second, but I found that that was problematic. I mean, she goes all the way to this planet, and then this guy doesn't even want to train her. He's like giving her a hard time about being trained. And then that's another thing. Like, it was one of my complaints from the last Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens, where you have this woman mastering how to use a lightsaber, mastering all these high level skills of a Jedi without any kind of training whatsoever. And that goes against everything that the Star Wars series has been about. Like, even the greatest Jedis and stuff like that had to go through intensive training. They had like a school for the Jedi so that they could master the Force and learn these various skills. They had to go through training. We saw how Luke Skywalker went through training with Obi-Wan Kenobi and also with Yoda. And, we saw how Anakin Skywalker was trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda and these other Jedi masters and all that kind of stuff. But here you had this woman mastering all these high-level skills to such a degree that she didn't even really need training at that point. And then when she had training, it was very little training. It wasn't really deep or impressive. I mean, they kind of like touched on what the Force is and all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't nowhere near on the level of how Yoda had his discussion with Luke Skywalker and made it all deep and profound and spiritual and all this and that. So that was another thing that I didn't like. And I mentioned the lightsaber fight, how it was whack. It didn't really live up to the hype. Um, the movie, another complaint that I had was that they had too many spaceship battle scenes and all that kind of stuff that really didn't add much to the plot. And the movie was very long, so that's another complaint that I have about the movie. It was very long. But I will say this. I mean, overall, it's entertaining enough for someone who's not familiar with Star Wars. If you just like action and all that kind of stuff, and you're not concerned about like the whole Star Wars franchise, then you'll be fine watching this movie. But for those of us who are big fans of Star Wars, you can see that Disney, since they have taken over this franchise, they have done a disservice to it. I mean, these writers are not as committed to the original script, even though they're borrowing from the original Star Wars episodes and all that stuff, and basically stealing from those to repackage and sell you back the same product and stuff like that. Um, they're just not as committed to the original ideals of Star Wars. And, really, I think they're doing Star Wars a disservice, man. And another thing that I want to talk about briefly before I close out this video is just, the concept of the Empire. Because if you watch The Return of the Jedi, you will see that the Empire was defeated. So they don't adequately explain how the Empire reemerges to be a major force and how the Republic was destroyed. They don't really go through it in a satisfactory manner. So that's another thing that is disappointing about this movie. But for those of you who have seen this film, for all my Star Wars geeks and all that stuff, tell me what y'all think. What did y'all think about Star Wars? Do you think it lived up to the hype? I mean, I just remember seeing those trailers and being all hyped up and couldn't wait to see this film. I couldn't wait to this time of the year so I could see this. And I was disappointed, I'm sad to say. So again, tell me what y'all think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.